I've read 110 books in 2024, and these are my top 15. I could not narrow it down any further than that, so you're gonna have to deal with not top 10, but a top 15. They're also not in any order, except for the top one. I have one favorite book of the year, which I will be sharing, but the rest are in no, like, order. I also got a new little mic. It's supposed to just attach to my clothes, but I'm scared, and I feel like it wasn't recording as clearly when I did that, so I'm just gonna hold it up for this video. And then hopefully in prior videos I'll develop some like confidence in having it just attached to my shirt. But for today, this is what we've got going. So welcome to the party. Let's talk about my favorite books of 2024. The first book that I'd like to talk about today is one of only like I think there's only two nonfiction on this list, which is crazy, but that is A Father's Story by Lionel Dahmer. You might recognize that last name, and that is because this is the father of Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer. And so you can probably already see the reason I picked this book up. I just thought that like a father reckoning with his son being a serial killer was the most interesting concept for a book I've heard of in a while. And it really did not disappoint. Throughout this book, he talks about Jeffrey's childhood into the point where he learned that his son was a murderer, to going to his son's trial and finding out the specifics of what his son had done to these innocent people. And all the way up until Jeffrey's death and where he thinks that his son had actually made improvements after being on medication. I just thought this was so fascinating. Like, I've never read from the perspective of a family member of a serial killer before. And I think that's like, I don't want to say it's like a voice that's desperately needed because when we talk about like serial killers and stuff, like true crime, I feel like the voice that's needed is like the victims, obviously, and like the victim's family. But I do think it's a very interesting perspective to read about. And there were just so many hard-hitting moments in this book. Like I said before, like he didn't realize the specifics of what his son was accused of doing until he was sitting in the courtroom hearing the evidence. And one part of this book that really struck me was when he was fighting with his son over a box or something because his son was living with his grandmother at the time, and his grandmother was like very conservative, very like church going woman, and she was convinced that Joffrey was storing like porn in like this box or something, and it was a locked box. And his father was like being like, Jeffrey, you just gotta get rid of it. Like, it makes your grandmother uncomfortable. You're living here for free. Just like fucking get rid of this porn. And Jeffrey was like yelling at him and like being like, I have no privacy here. Like, you can't make me open this box because his father was trying to get him to open it. And eventually his father let the subject drop. And he realized, like, during the trial, that in that box was a severed human head. I can't even. Like, the weight of that and the weight of knowing that, like, that's that son that you loved, that you raised from a small little baby. And he really reckons in this book with, like, what did I do wrong? And where why did my son become like this? And it's just so thought provoking and so deep and dark. I really, really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it for people who are interested in true crime. I just think it's like a once in a lifetime kind of read, and I loved it. I hate to say I loved it about this book, so maybe I don't want to say that online where thousands of people can see this, even though thousands of people are not going to see this. Theoretically, they could, so maybe I don't want that on the record. I thought this was a really thought provoking, very interesting book, is what I will say. And I didn't get any of these books out ahead of time, so I'm like in the middle of every take, I'm gonna be frantically searching for these books on my bookshelves. Next on this list, we have Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. I really fell in love with some Ira Levin books on this year, which is a spoiler for another book you'll be seeing on this list pretty shortly. So this book follows Rosemary, who moves into like her dream apartment building with her husband. It's very old, like old fashioned but huge and beautiful apartment, and she's just so excited to move in there and start a family. Her husband's an actor, and eventually he agrees that they should start having a family. So she gets pregnant, and after she gets pregnant, she realizes that her neighbors are very invested in her pregnancy, and she realizes that they're an odd group of people who she thinks are doing some odd things. And that's all I'm gonna say about this because I don't want to spoil it. I feel like a lot of people have seen the movie. I didn't see the movie before going into this, so I was like completely blindsided by everything that ended up happening. which I think is really the way to go into this, but I do think you can still enjoy it if you've seen the movie because it is like a little bit different to have the reading experience instead. And right now is where we get to the problem with this video, which is I have a hard time saying things about books that I like. When it's a book that I don't really like, I can really dissect it and really get into my critiques and stuff. But for books I like, I have much less to say about them. So I'm going to try my best to actually describe what I like about them in this video, but we'll see. First of all, I really fell in love with like horror this year specifically. So it was really nice to read this like horror classic. And it was just so easy to read. It was so easy to get into. And once you were into it, you didn't want to put it down. And I just really loved where everything went going. Like I loved how like creepy and eerie everything was, and up till like that final moment in the book, like how it ended. Oh my god. Oh my god. I would definitely recommend this one for horror readers or someone who's just interested in the subject. I think it was a great one. After that, we have another horror, and that is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So this book follows four people who are arriving at this place called Hill House. The first is an occult scholar who has come there looking for like evidence for his research, and he's invited three other people. Well, he invited a lot of other people, but these three were the only ones who would come. One of them is one of the people who own the house or is set to own it after like his relative dies or something. And then you have Theodora and Eleanor. And Theodore and Eleanor were both invited because they had experienced some sort of psychic phenomena in the past. But this book really centers on Eleanor, and they move into this house. They're only sent to be there for like a month or something like that. And slowly the house starts to wear them down. It's the kind of thing where like the house is turning them against each other, and the house is scaring the hell out of them, but also making them feel like they truly belong there. It is just so spooky. It really gets under your skin. And there's nothing that outrageous that really happens in the house. Like, for the most part, it's like they're hearing noises and they're seeing like apparitions and they're getting lost and stuff like that. And the house is like kind of trying to tear them apart from each other. So you also like slowly throughout the book, they started there and they were all like friendly and like happy to see each other, and then slowly they start to resent each other and they start to piss each other off. I just thought this was like a masterclass in building tension and suspicion. Not suspicion, suspense is the word I meant to say. I thought the atmosphere in this book was just amazing. It was so creepy and eerie. And I really just loved the slow build up of things. I also really liked that for the time period, especially like this was written, I can't say that. I don't know when this was written. This was written like early 1900s, I'm pretty sure, or like 1950s. I could be completely wrong. But either account, society was widely homophobic at the time. And there's a character in this that is like strongly hinted at being gay. So I enjoyed that aspect of it for its time, especially. And I just really fell in love with the writing in this book as well. I really I wanted to read everything Shirley Jackson's ever written after reading this. Um, I really enjoyed it, and I'm so excited to read more by the author. Next, I have Against the Loveless World. I should be. There we go. That's better. This is the story of a Palestinian woman who's sharing her life story from an Israeli confinement cell. So you're really like learning about her life growing up when she dreamed of like marriage and modern appliances, but then found herself as like a jilted bride struggling with just disappointment in life. And then it kind of like shows injustices the Palestinians face, and it builds and builds and builds until she joins the resistance and is ultimately caught and put in a confinement cell. I really love this like beautiful, powerful prose, and I originally just loved the story here. Like, I loved reading from the perspective of Palestinian because this is a Palestinian author, and I love just being able to read like a Palestinian story. I think given like the genocide that's happening, it's all the more important to read Palestinian stories by Palestinian voices. So I really just enjoyed that aspect of things. But I also think it really goes to show like what life is like for Palestinians and how they can turn to resistance and why they turn to resistance and why that resistance is important ultimately. So this is a book I would highly recommend. I would highly recommend all the ones on this list, but I had to say, especially for this book, I think this book is a really important read. After that, we have Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. This book follows a main character who's once a classic piano player. I don't know why I said classic. She like, I don't know why I said that, but she was in like a conservatory as a young child where she learned to play piano like no one else can. She was taught by her parents who fled China during the Cultural Revolution. But today, her parents are dead. She's working like a dead end job that pays her nothing. until she is approached by this woman who works at this natural beauty store. And she's approached there and offered a job. So she takes the job, and it's like this really popular beauty brand. It's supposed to be all like natural and like it enhances your natural beauty, but it's like serums and skincares and stuff like that that are supposed to like have these effects on you. And so she starts working there and she starts using all their products, and slowly the products begin to change her. And slowly she gets more and more suspicious of what's happening at this company. And it's happening as she's getting even more intertwined in the company itself. And it really just, again, this is another one that's like a slow build to the horror elements. Like I said before, loving horror this year. This was definitely part of that. This is part of the reason I was loving horror this year. I thought this book had such interesting commentary on like the beauty industry. I absolutely loved how weird and wacky it got, especially at the end. And I think it also had a lot to say about like race and beauty standards. And obviously it was talking about race from like she was Chinese, and these products particularly were like turning her to look more and more like a white girl. And they also like had her change her name while she was at the store. She had a traditionally like Chinese name, and they made her change it to something that was more like white American girl sounding. So it had a lot of commentary in that aspect as well, and I just really enjoyed this. I cannot wait to see what else this author does. I know she has a new book coming out in 2025, and I'm so excited for it. After that, we have Animal by Lisa Taddeo. This is a book where, in the very first scene of this book, a man kills himself in front of the main character. And from there, she decides to flee New York and head out west in search of this woman named Alice, who she is convinced is the only woman who can help her make sense of her life. And as you're reading this, you don't know who Alice is. And it isn't revealed to you until like much later in the book. So you're kind of like slowly coming to terms with like what this main character is doing with her life and like her life story, I guess is what I actually meant to say there. And like essentially she's slowly uncovering this horrific event that she witnessed as a child. This is the book, honestly, out of all the ones on this list, this is the book that I remember the least about, which is really such a shame though, because what I do remember is loving it. I remember the prose is just like incredible and it sucked you in. It was very like raw but very beautiful at the same time. I read this book in my Reading Phoebe Bridgers' Favorite Books Part 2 video, so if you want to hear more thoughts about it, you can go there. I don't want to like drone on and on and on when I don't remember the specifics as much, but I do remember loving it, so this is a book I would recommend. My cat is scratching at the door, desperate to be let in, but I can't let her in because I have my tripod resting on my bed, and she'll jump up on my bed and probably like knock my tripod over and then my camera will break and I feel so bad, but I can't do anything about it. So let's talk about the next book. And that next book is Severance by Ling Ma. This book follows our main character Candace, who's in New York City when a plague sweeps the nation, which is essentially turning people into like mindless drones, like mindless zombies. She stays in New York basically as long as she can. She continues working and like going to work until the moment that it's impossible. And she ends up like escaping the city and finding this group of survivors that she's ends up staying with, but they're led by a man named Bob, and she does not trust him. So you're kind of like, it's told in two different timelines. One is like the beginning of the plague and when she's staying in New York City, and the other is after she's left the city and is with these group of survivors. This book has so much commentary on capitalism. Like the fact that these people turn into mindless drones and they just keep working and keep doing the same like route, how do you say that? Just keep doing the same like mindless tasks over and over and over really just says a lot of things. And I love any book that critiques capitalism, so obviously this is gonna be a favorite. And it's also just crazy because this book was written like pre-COVID, and then it came out in 2020, I want to say. So like this came out and then COVID happened. And it turned out this author was not too wrong in her predictions of how a plague would affect capitalism. I just thought it was so interesting, such good commentary, and this is one that it's definitely been sticking with me throughout the time since I've read it, and I really enjoyed it. Next, we've got A Big Boy, which I need to find, which is somewhere. Oh, it's hidden. It's hidden behind all these other books. That's great. And that big boy is Dune by Frank Herbert. This book essentially, if you don't know, which I feel like most people do know now that the movie is out, but I will explain it regardless. This book is a sci-fi novel that follows House Atreides, who are given like dominion over the planet Arrakis. Well, they're assigned basically to move to Arrakis and like have dominion over it. And Arrakis is a planet that's known for its mineral called spice, which is like a very important mineral that everyone wants control over. But shortly after the family arrives there, they are betrayed, and the son and the mother manage to escape, and they manage to live and be taken in by the indigenous people of Arrakis, which are named the Fremen. And that's basically where the story takes off. But it's also like half of the book because it takes a while to get there. Like, there's a slow build up in this book, but I do think it's worth it. There's just so much here. Like, it's a beast of a book. There's so much world building, and it's so interesting. Like, the world building really reminds me of like Tolkien, and how expansive it is and how interesting it is. But I do think that at the same time, you can kind of tell that his imagination went beyond his skill. Like, I think his imagination is great. I think the ideas that he has for this book are great, but he isn't too great at writing on a technical basis. Like, there's a lot of scenes where he's skipping in between the perspectives of different characters within the same scene, which is just kind of sloppy. There's some things that are discovered in this book that I think could have made like a greater impact if they were revealed later on. And then also in the middle of this book, there's like a 3 or 2 year time jump. And then all of a sudden it's like years later and you have to like adjust to that, which I think was kind of sloppy as well. But ultimately, I loved this book. Like, I didn't even care about those things when I was reading it because I was just so invested in it. And I think it's so unique of a story. I loved the critiques and the commentary on the chosen one trope and on white saviorism. I also I just really loved it. I was so immersed in this book, and I can't wait to continue on with the series. I'm only finished with book 2, so I have book 3 to go. But I've heard that as they go on, they get weirder and also worse. But I'm excited for the weirder part. So I would highly recommend reading Dune if it's something that interests you. Again, it's a slow one. You need some patience with it, but I do think it's worth it. Next, we've got Penance by Eliza Clark. This is a fictional true crime novel that follows this group of teenage girls who killed and murdered another girl by setting her on fire. And it's following the perspective of this journalist who's trying to write like the definitive novel on this crime. But you begin to question his motives, even though he's doing the work. Like, he's researching he's researching the historical the historical history. Good job, Serena. He's researching the history of the town. He's also interviewing witnesses and family members and corresponding with the murderers themselves. But towards the end of the book, I don't think this is a spoiler. You kind of come to question his motives. Like, he's not a very reliable narrator. I thought this book was so good. I actually didn't really love Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, which I feel like is her more popular novel, but this one really did it for me. Um, I absolutely loved the critiques of the true crime genre. I'm not really a true crime girl, which is kind of crazy why A Father's Story was on this list, because it's not really my type of thing. This book sums up how I feel about true crime, like the way that it exploits people, the way that it dramatizes things for entertainment value, the way that we should really be thinking about that. But ultimately, I really loved how multidimensional the characters were. Like, you get the perspective kind of every character, so it makes you feel for the murders sometimes, and it also makes you kind of dislike the victim at sometimes. So it really made me feel like all the characters were like fully fleshed out as real people. And ultimately, this book just made me so excited to see what Eliza Clark does next. Like, this is definitely a favorite of the year, as all these books are. I don't need to keep saying stuff like that. Next, we have Jane Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, and this is the next nonfiction and last nonfiction book on this list. This book consists of 2 letters that are written on the 100-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. One is like dedicated to his nephew, I believe, and the other is just kind of like an open letter to all Americans to work against racism and attack specifically the legacy of racism. This was my first ever Baldwin read and immediately made me want to read everything he's ever written. His writing is just brilliant. His prose is so beautiful, and the way that he says things is so amazing. Like, I can't even describe it, but there's like, if I were to say a sentence, I'd just say it like in the most plain way. But then he comes up with the most like brilliant, amazing way to put that sentence into different words. Like, I can't get over it. I absolutely love this. It's very short, so I don't have like much to say about it. Obviously, it's important in itself just for talking about racism and attacking the legacy of racism. That's obviously a thing we desperately need to do in America, even though this book was written so long ago. We still need to make some progress and really deal with that ourselves. But yeah, in general, I just fell in love with Baldwin for this book. Then we have Our Wives Under the Sea, and this book follows Miri, I think is her name. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure that's her name. Miri, yes, I was right. Okay, so this book follows Miri, whose wife Leah went on this deep sea exploration, and she was only supposed to be there for like a week or something like that, but she ended up being in the deep sea for months and months and months. And she has finally come back at the beginning of this book, but she has changed and she's slowly slipping away from her. And she also has clearly brought something from the deep sea back with her. This is just an absolutely beautiful portrayal of like love and grief and also horror at the same time. And you will see throughout this list, this is a theme. It's just like horror books and the themes of love and grief. I loved this year. I don't know what was up with me because most of these books I read before my grandmother died. So it's not even like I was purposely seeking them out. I was just in love with the theme of grief this year, which was maybe a little telling. But it's just eerie and slow and beautiful with just lush prose. I don't think this is a book for everyone because it is very weird and not much actually happens, but it was for me and I really loved it. I think this is a book that would make like a great A24 movie. Next up, we've got Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. This is kind of a complicated book to describe, but I will try my best. So essentially, it's a fictional biography of X told by her wife. And X was like a very familiar, oh, familiar? What the fuck am I saying? X was a very famous artist, just like a very well known, like eccentric celebrity. And after she died, her wife got a lot of requests to like write a biography about her, and she turned down every single one because X did not want a biography written about her. However, one asshole journalist decided to publish one regardless without even interviewing the wife because she did not consent to be interviewed. And this pisses the wife off. And so she decides that she's going to write her own biography of her wife because she knows her wife better. However, throughout the process of it, she realizes that she really did not know her wife, like, at all. And then at the same time, this book is taking place in, like, an alternate reality United States where the southern states split from the rest of the country after World War II and form this southern theocracy that's, like, fascist. And in present day in this book, like, that's just getting resolved, and they're just, like, reunifying, while the wife of X is writing biography, but that definitely comes into play in the book. I love this book. First of all, the writing was beautiful and immediately caught my interest. I found myself underlying like crazy in this book, which is not something I normally do, so it really shows you how much I love the writing when I do that. I'm not even someone who really like falls in love with writing a lot either. So when it sticks out to me, like it really means a lot. I mainly just love like the imagination and creativity behind this book though. Like it really is a fiction book that reads like nonfiction. She has citations, she has photographs to really like flesh out the world and the narrative. And again, it deals with that theme of love and grief, but it also has like these political themes at the same time, which talks about like fascism and theocracy and oppression, and I just thought this book was amazing. Like, after I read this, my thoughts on Goodreads I put were like a perfect book, and I still agree with that. I think that everyone should read this book. It's just such an underrated, amazing book, and I loved it. And now we're down to the final three. I don't want to say top three because, again, these aren't in any order except for the first one. So we're going to find out that one soon. But for now, the next book I would like to talk about is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This was my first ever fiction by James Baldwin, and I loved it just as much as I loved The Fire Next Time. Essentially, this follows a young American man who's living in Paris. At the beginning, like prior to when the novel really starts, he proposes to this other American girl, but she says she needs time to think about if she wants to be married, so she goes off and she's traveling. And while she's traveling and while he's waiting on her answer, he meets Giovanni, an Italian man who he falls in love with quickly. And this book is just, oh my god. Oh my god. This book is beautiful. Like, the writing is incredible. It is so lush. Like, everything I previously said about James Baldwin also applies to this book. His writing just makes me go crazy. I think it's incredible and brilliant, and every good word you could possibly put to writing, it applies. Like, when I read this, I think I only rated it like 4 stars or something, which is crazy because it's a book that's really stuck with me. And a lot of like the lines in here have really stuck with me, particularly when he's talking about love. And it's just like such a heartbreaking book at the same time. It really like punches you in the gut because the main character whose name I can't remember, David. David is like he doesn't want to be in love with Giovanni, but he is, but he's like trying to deny it and he's trying to deny who he really is, and it's just so heartbreaking. but it's such a beautiful book at the same time. Like, this has really, really grown on me after I've read it. Even though I already loved it when I had read it, I just like, I think everyone should read this book. I think it's incredible. Definitely deserves to be a modern classic. Then we have the other Iron Levin book, which I hinted at earlier, and that is The Stepford Wives. So this book follows a woman who moves from the city to the suburbs with her family, so like her husband and her two young children. But soon after she moves to this town of Stepford, she realizes that something is wrong there. Particularly, something is wrong with the wives and the women of this town. And she sets off to try to figure that out. And holy shit, this is like a feminist classic, even though it's written by a man. Like, it is so, so good. It is just so spooky. And it's like another one that, like, slowly, 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 the terror just grows on you. And it also, like, Rosemary's Baby was a really great book, but this one has a lot of commentary on feminism specifically and, like, the kind of woman that men want and how even, like, men who seem to be progressive are complicit in women's oppression. I just, like, I read this book after seeing the movie too, so I knew everything that was gonna happen, but I still loved it so much. I think it's really worth the read. I loved it. I loved it. Loved all these books, but I love this one too. And then we've got the very last book on the list, which is a book that is very, very dear to me, and I need to find it on my shelf. That book is Monstrilio by Geraldo Simano Cordova, and I already know that I'm gonna be able to say, like, nothing that makes sense about this book. Like, I can describe it to you, but in terms of my thoughts, I'm just gonna be rambling on about how much I love it and not being able to describe the reasons I love it, because that's how much I love this book. Like, the more I love a book, the less I can say about it. But anyway, this book essentially, in the beginning of the novel, a woman's son dies, and she, in her grief, takes a knife and carves open his chest and takes out a little piece of his lung and puts it in a jar. From there, she starts feeding this little piece of lung, and it eventually turns into a little monster that she names Monstrilio. God, just like talking about this book is making me so, so happy. This is such a weird book, but I absolutely love the exploration of grief and love and, like, feeling monstrous and what does it mean to be human. And there's just so much going on in here, but it's still like a really succinct, like, perfectly composed novel. I think some novels try to do like way too much and they have way too much going on. This book is just like one self-composed story. Self-composed? What was I trying to say there? Self-contained. Self-contained story. It doesn't go on like wild tangents like all these other things, but it just is still has so much commentary inside of it. And it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. This is another book I think would make a really good A24 movie, personally. Just because it's like weird but really insightful at the same time. I just love this book so much. This is definitely my favorite book of the year. I had this book in March too. Like, I read it in the beginning of the year and I was like, nothing's gonna top this. And then nothing did. I think everyone should read this book. I think this is one of the greatest books that has ever been written. It's also written beautifully. Like, bizarre and brilliant. Bizarre and brilliant. That's how you have to describe this book. And I'm just rambling on. This is also a debut novel. Like, I can't wait to see what else this author does. I'm just rambling. I'm gonna put this book down now. So there you go. Those were my favorite books of 2024. Out of the 110 that I read, I think having 15 favorite books out of that number is pretty good. A little over, I don't even know actually. A little over 10%, I think. If I can do math, I'm a law major. I did not study math, so that's not my strong suit. That's always the joke with lawyers. It's like, yeah, like I went to law school because I couldn't do math. So there you go. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I think it's 10%. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite books were down below. I would love to know. Maybe I'll pick some of them up myself. It would be fun to do like a little video of like my subscribers' favorite books. So if you want to leave a comment, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of these books as well. And honestly, pick up Monstrilio because I think you should. And there you go. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon with another video. Goodbye.